recently I've started to be much more deliberate about applying the things, the concepts, the tools I talk about in these videos to my life. So like literally decisions I make, actions I take, making sure I follow through and ultimately preach what I practice what I preach. And as I've been doing that, there's some thoughts and observations and things that I've noticed, which I want to think through a little bit. Firstly, I think there's the obvious, that it is much harder to apply and enact these things than to just talk about them theoretically. And that's a known thing, right? It's always easier to talk about it, to see it in other people and talk about it for them. But when you have to do it yourself, it's way harder. That's a given, we know that, but that's true and worth noting. I think there's also a component where it's hard not only for yourself, right, to make hard decisions, to do the hard stuff, right? It's easy when it's easy, it's hard when it's hard. But part of what makes it hard is the environment. When you change something, when you approach something differently, when you try and think better, right, be better, inherently there's going to be friction there. There's going to be other people in your lives who just by the simple fact that something is different and changing, that makes them uncomfortable, particularly if it goes against kind of a value or something that they have, and they have this perception of you and how you should act or how you've historically acted, and you act differently. That's going to cause friction, and that can make things difficult, right? And that really requires you to strengthen the muscles that we talk about, particularly the kind of mathematical, logical thinking, as well as the mental toughness, because that's going to be tested. Maybe it's hard for me to distinguish those two as one being more important, but the one that comes to mind more clearly is the mental toughness, because you can almost think of other people as an extension of your subconscious that are monitoring this pleasure versus discomfort meter and trying to keep it in check. Now, they oftentimes have, whether they realize it or not, right, they have their own subconscious, these kinds of selfish reasons they're doing that. It's almost as if like there's a subconscious network of your environment that connects and is all trying to kind of work in unison to minimize the discomfort of the network. And you're dealing with that, right? So to deal with that, you have to have the mental toughness to sustain that discomfort that's going to come, to take that feedback, that pushback, and try and do it the right way. The mathematical logic helps a lot because that helps kind of keep things clear and you have that clarity so you could apply the mental toughness. So I think that's certainly an observation. Speaking about these things in conversation was hard, and that still is hard, right? When you talk to people about it, that hurts. But then when you take the actions, on the one hand, it makes it tougher. But I wonder as well, though, I think there's also a component, and this gets directly to kind of be the change you want to see in the world. My hope is that there's a component of when you start to do these things and these little things and you apply them, if you can do it the right way, and by the right way, I often refer to Richard Feynman, if you do it the Feynman way, if you do it from a place of genuine curiosity, humility, empathy, logic, obviously, rational thought, all that type of stuff. If you do it that way, and it's real and it's genuine, I really do think there is an impact. And this, much of what I say is cliche, and I joke about this all the time, that much of what I learn and talk about in these videos, most people would look at and be like, well, fuck yeah, man, we knew that. Obviously, we've been talking about these things for hundreds of years. But the idea that, you taking a different action, you being the change you want to see, can have a domino effect, can be a spark that gets other people. Now that I'm starting to see a glimmer of that, you start to realize, like, hey, that's true. Like, wow, that shit that just seemed like a cliche that people were saying, and like, oh yeah, that sounds nice, but that's not real. I think there's truth to it, right? As I start to take some of these actions and I have conversations about it, not in a preachy way, not in a way of like, oh, look at me, I'm so great, but just a genuine way of like, hey, here's how I'm thinking about this, and here's why I'm thinking about it this way, and I might be wrong, and all that type of stuff. You Feynman it ultimately. I do think that I'm starting to see people where that registers with them. And back to the prior point, there's certainly people that look at that and it speaks to their subconscious in a negative way. It almost holds a mirror up and makes them feel like, well, if you're doing that and I'm not, cognitive dissonance, you must be bad because I'm not bad, so you must be bad. And you certainly get some of that. And then you get people on the other end of the spectrum, which are much more receptive to it off the bat. And it's important for me as those things happen not to prejudge that and say anybody that disagrees with me, clearly they're just struggling, right? They have their own issues. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am doing something wrong. So to Feynman it, you need to keep that thought in mind. But my big point is that I think I'm seeing those little seeds. I'm seeing little things where I feel like by truly applying this, by truly trying to be the change I want to see, I do think it's getting people to question. It's getting them to think. It's opening up, because that's really what it comes down to for me. It's this whole idea of entertain the possibility. I say that phrase as much as any other phrase I say, and I think these small actions that I'm taking, it's starting to get people to entertain the possibility of like, oh shit, I didn't even realize that was really an option. Like conceptually, I knew it was an option, but I didn't really realize I could do that I could do things differently, that I could actually try and take a stand here, or try and make things better, or sacrifice in some way that I think is the right thing to do, or whatever it is, right? I see that. I see that, not in everybody, but in a small population of people that I interact with, where I see them start to entertain the possibility that things, maybe you could think better, and maybe you could be better.